Yeah, I think they're on their way.
If everyone will be patient for just a moment. Wow, that's really cool. As soon as the last of the witnesses are in, we'll start. Actually, I'll do the unofficial. The applause you did, that's the last applause for today. You know, our egos can't take it. You know, no, but the only thing we ask is if you like something, you can probably let it out. If you don't like something, keep it in. This will be an official hearing, so it's exactly the same as a Washington hearing, except, you know, the seats are more comfortable, there's more of them, and we'll remain after both panels for a little while before I have to catch a plane and Blake has to do how many more community events?
We got a couple more today.
We really were all in the back together, we promise. Just be a second. I'm told the rain I brought was a good thing for this part of Texas. Is that true? Coming from California, you know that I can't bring you any rain. We should have had you guys hold hands coming out.
Something was lost in translation here.
We're sorry, we came in the
morning,
back door and
I'm
missed
sorry,
signals. Thank you. The full committee hearing on exploring all energy options and solutions, South Texas, as a leader in creating jobs and strengthening the economy will come to order. The Oversight Committee mission is that we exist for two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. Our job is to work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the federal bureaucracy. Today, we will explore both the good that comes from natural gas and oil exploration and wind, and the problems created by government and the impediments at times to that. I'd first like to take a moment to thank the university. Texas A&M, a place I wanted to come to and thought that it wasn't in Corpus Christi until I found out there were multiple campuses, was very generous to provide this lovely hall today. And I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Fahrenthal, for arranging this and for being born in such a beautiful part of Texas. Your parents did think ahead. Briefly, energy is the lifeblood of our country's economy. No matter where you are in the energy debate, we all know that if you take back all forms of energy, we are back to being in the Stone Age as a caveman. Ultimately, all of the progress of mankind starts with leveraging energy. That energy warmed the early homes, but it also created the opportunity for leisure and thought and research and development. In fact, today, it's the tremendous amount of food that's provided by very few using fossil fuels mostly to reap harvest from our land. It's the factories that turn out ever greater products more efficiently, less energy, or more energy in some cases, but certainly less human labor. The truth is, without finding affordable energy, we will slip back as a society. And with 7 billion people on the earth, that problem is bigger than ever. Until recently, America was a net importer. We made the assumption that, in fact, we would be importing ever more oil and ever more natural gas. And although our imports of oil, fortunately, have stemmed their ever-increasing flow, the real good news for us, in addition to domestic oil, is the abundance of natural gas. People on the left and the right now talk in terms of the United States being the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. Additional oil production is yielding even more natural gas, while improved fracking techniques have made natural gas reserves throughout the United States, both here in the South and all the way to our northern border, more abundant. It has become so obvious that we are going to be a major producer and exporter of fossil fuels that even in the President's State of the Union, he took great recognition of the increases on his watch, and of course, the creation by DOE of hydraulic fracking during his presidency. Well, maybe that was slightly off. I come to Texas today for 2 reasons. First of all, because when we held a hearing in Bakersfield, California, my good friend Blake was willing to come there and well, I think he did brag a lot about Texas.
I did.
He did. But in fact, he came with the wealth of knowledge that growing up here gave him. And it was a great addition to our field hearing on the potential for oil and natural gas on very old fields in California that made us realize that there were many reasons to come to Texas, not the least of which was my colleague and friend on the committee. Texas still ranks #1 in crude oil. But a lot of what we're going to hear about today is the areas of growth in Texas. In addition to oil, the natural gas reserves, the wind energy, and of course, the willingness by Texas to do oil refining and gas liquefaction. So although we come here primarily to hear from our witnesses, we come with a great deal of research to know we come to a place, to a state that is energy excited, energy friendly, and in fact, where jobs in energy and the derivatives thereof have made this an area of low unemployment and a likelihood of even lower unemployment. So with that, I'd like to recognize for an opening statement my good friend, colleague, a man I've only known for 1 year, but who I really believe has changed the Oversight Committee, particularly because of his knowledge of computers, law, the Constitution, and oh yes, energy. Blake Farrenholt.
Thank you, Chairman Issa. And
feel free.
thank you, Chairman Issa, for coming down here. We have a great story to tell in Texas, how with our regulatory environment being friendly and rational, our tax structure being friendly and rational, and the natural resources that God has blessed this state with, we can be an example for the rest of the country in how we can safely and economically produce the natural resources that we have, be they oil, be they gas, be they wind, be they geothermal. We are a leader in the energy industry, #1 in oil and gas, and we will continue to be leaders. And really, it's what this country needs right now. Low-cost energy, which we are now seeing not just in the shale sands or the shale gas that we're producing here in Texas, but across the entire country. We're seeing plentiful and cheap energy. And that really gives us a competitive advantage in the United States, and especially here in Texas with our proximity to this oil and gas and the infrastructure that we have in place. You know, to build things, it requires energy, and our low energy costs can sometimes trump the lower labor costs in other parts of the world. Now, you add to that some of the regulatory burdens that we face, well, maybe we can do something about those regulatory burdens. And I think we're going to hear a little bit about that today. So I'm really happy we're able to take the Texas message to the rest of the country. I'm happy that we've got a great panel to educate the committee, create a record that can be referred to as we look for what is right to do in America as far as energy goes. So y'all didn't come to hear me talk. We came to hear from our panel of experts. So I'll yield back the remainder of my time.
I thank the gentleman. All members will have 7 days to submit opening statements and extraneous material for the record. We now will recognize our first panel. Ms. Elizabeth Ames Jones is the chairwoman of the Railroad Commission of Texas. And I guess without rail, that coal wouldn't be exported and an awful lot of other things, would it?
And the Railroad Commission in Texas regulates the oil and gas industry. It's counterintuitive.
No, it's not counterintuitive. It's government. Mr. Sharif Suki is Chief Executive Officer of Cheniere Energy, Inc., and a longtime participant in the energy industry. First, and I will say this if he doesn't get to it, first in the idea that we would import, and now in the idea that we will successfully export natural gas. And Mr. Jeff Weiss is Executive Vice President of Orion Drilling Company, LLC. Pursuant to our committee rules, you know the drill. Would you please rise to take the oath for your testimony? And raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you will give here today will be the truth, the whole truth?
I do.
Let the record indicate all three witnesses answered in the affirmative. And please have a seat.
Can we sit?
Thank you. This hearing is still an official congressional hearing with all the same rules, but we came here to hear you. So the two things I would say is, although lights will come on and there's a guideline that implies 5 minutes, we're not going to cut you off exactly at the end of 5. Additionally, your entire written statement is in the record. So use the 5 minutes for summarizing and anything else you want to say, and then hopefully we'll have a healthy debate in which our questions match your answers. That is critical, that that we have questions for their answers. With that, ladies first.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Jones.
Thank you, Chairman Issa and Congressman Farenthold. It's wonderful to be here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify here, and I am delighted to represent the interests of Texas and our sister oil and gas producing states who are effectively regulating oil and natural gas exploration and production activities, including hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling within our state borders, in our state waters, and on our lands, privately owned and state-owned as well. And I might say, Congressman Farenthold, thank you for bragging on us, but it ain't bragging if it's true, as we say in Texas. In fact, we are the country's #1 oil and natural gas producing state. We produce over 30% of all the natural gas that comes up out of the ground in America comes up out of the ground in Texas, not too far away from where we sit today. And over 20% of all the crude oil that comes up out of the ground in the great country of America comes from the state of Texas. And in fact, that crude oil production has turned around thanks to the renaissance, if you will, of drilling due to hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling techniques. So it's very, very exciting what the future bodes, not just for our state, but for our country and energy security. The regulation of oil and gas activities in Texas, Chairman, I'm sorry to say, only in Texas would you have an agency that is named that has absolutely nothing to do with its mission statement. And the Railroad Commission has nothing to do with trains anymore. We lost the little bit of oversight we had of the rail industry in 2005. So we are purely and simply the state's energy agency.
In any other state, what they would do is make a new agency and not close the old one that no longer had a job.
Exactly. We don't want to do what they do in Washington, D.C. and add on layers and layers, but in fact, everything related to energy production from the ground below is under the purview of the Railroad Commission of Texas. We've regulated these activities over 100 years, since that day in 1901 when Spindletop came in so big down the coast and a salt dome. The Railroad Commission, not long after that, was involved in creating, to the extent that at the time there was one, the energy economy that is Texas. We have oversight of over 1 million wells have been drilled, and the Railroad Commission of Texas is responsible for more oil and natural gas wells than any other entity in the nation. Currently, over 45% of all the rigs running in America are running right here in Texas. So yes, we have a lot of natural resources, not just oil and natural gas, but we preserve and protect our other natural resources like water, and we have the regulatory processes in place to manage them properly. My goal as a chairman of the Railroad Commission of Texas is very clear. My goals and those of my fellow two commissioners: the protection of our environment, the prevention of the waste of energy, which is unique to Washington, and I'll explain that in a minute, and the protection of the correlative rights of mineral owners, and the safety of our citizens, of course. And the intended consequences of all of these state-centric goals are a win-win, not just for our citizens, not just for the industry and the companies like those here today, but also for the environment as well. So I'm giving you these, laying this foundation for future questions so that you have a good perspective of what the Railroad Commission of Texas really does and the contributions we are making to our sister states and their regulatory agencies as well. Our most important protection regime in place is that of water, and our strong regulatory regime has helped us avoid a single proven case of groundwater contamination occurring as a result of hydraulic fracturing. In fact, I was testifying to Congressman Ralph Hall's committee earlier in the spring in Washington, D.C., and I said then, and I say now, it's virtually, or to the extent that you would be more likely to hit the moon with a Roman candle than you would to contaminate groundwater from hydraulic fracturing so many miles below the earth. Unfortunately, there is at least one federal agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, that takes another position. And what it's seeming to me, my opinion and the opinion of very many people, that they prefer to stir fear by making preliminary assertions and then retreating from those assertions once the science rules them inaccurate. And hopefully, as we move forward in this meeting, and you, when you get back to Washington, I hope that you can do something about that. But as a steward of Texas energy resources, the prevention of waste is also important. And what that means is that we statutorily are required to prevent the waste of the mineral resources. And that means we cannot allow the hydrocarbon to be left in the ground or wasted if it can be responsibly produced according to our rules once a lease is signed. And this means that operators cannot be prevented from accessing their private property that they have leased, and that royalty owners have a right to enjoy the use of their private property, which is oil and natural gas in the case of the Railroad Commission of Texas. And billions of dollars change hands between parties, including the taxes, severance tax paid on production that goes to state coffers, the goods and services at various levels. And this is something unique to the Railroad Commission of Texas, unique by Washington standards anyway, and it's contrary to what federal agencies and the laws like the Endangered Species Act, which is used by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in a manner that kills jobs, halts growth, and stifles the economic development in the states. In fact, our mission is to protect the private property rights of the owners by allowing them to reap the benefits of the use of private property that maybe their grandfather or great-grandfather purchased so very long ago. So a reliable regulatory climate that we have at the Railroad Commission is of highest importance to investors who produce the jobs for this state. by investing in deals and drilling for oil and natural gas. And one of those is our commitment of issuing drilling permits in a timely manner, 1 to 3 days. Now, in doing that, we also take very seriously our inspection of sites. We take enforcement actions against bad actors, and we're well equipped to oversee all the drilling activity because we have strong rules and we have field offices and inspectors on the front lines across the state. And this is in, of course, direct conflict or contrary to the notion that one size regulatory climate from whatever Washington federal agency can do for the states. We certainly live here, we work here, we play here, we raise our families here, and we are best equipped to oversee the responsible production of our own energy resources. The Railroad Commission had some dealings with the EPA recently, and we wrote a letter in response to what we were seeing coming out of an EPA's draft report on groundwater contamination near Pavilion, Wyoming. In this, we saw a template, a beginning of a template anyway, a method of operation, an MO of the EPA, as I said, to create some kind of fear and hysteria and then have to back off because they didn't have the science to back it up. And we recently sent a letter to the EPA in this pavilion, weighing in from the Railroad Commissioner's perspective on how they approached this Pavilion, Wyoming draft report that in fact alleged contamination, and very well may have been contamination by the EPA itself in the wells they drilled to try and assess the contamination. We also had a recent case with a company in Texas called Range Resources, and the EPA chose to question our ability to regulate matters within our jurisdiction, in that case too, in Central Texas. And it was a contested issue, alleged groundwater contamination by a water well owner in Central Texas, and they called in the EPA, who came in and issued an emergency action to shut down the operator from drilling. And in fact, we brought the parties in to the Railroad Commission to assess scientifically what the real facts were. The EPA chose not to show to defend their position. The other party appeared and presented their case, and with our ruling, my fellow commissioners and I asserted our jurisdiction and authority to ensure regulatory certainty, due process for the parties, and decisions based on sound science and fact in the Texas oil or natural gas patch. Sound science, fact, and deliberative due process are the principles we stand by to do business. And those are the kinds of principles that the Texan voter expects and demands of this regulatory body. I was recently again at the Department of Energy Science Advisory Board Subcommittee on Shale Gas. I'm sure you are aware of that. And I went to testify to that panel. And the takeaway that I got as I left Washington, what I noticed and have been keeping somewhat track of, it's hard to do because there are a lot of them, the numerous amount of proposed studies coming out of Washington, D.C. on hydraulic fracturing. I believe that it is a misuse of taxpayer dollars. I can talk to you about the federal entities.
And we'll get to that during Q&A.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's a list that's so long between the Center for Disease Control and Prevention and the Agency for Toxic Substances. This has been studied and studied, and I look forward to discussing how we can alleviate those kinds of misuse of dollars. Thank you.
Chairman Issa, Congressman Farenthold, thank you very much for having me here today. Corpus Christi, happy to be back. It's been a few years. We've been here with very large projects in the past, but somehow with that testimony to what long-term modeling does can be awfully wrong. But we're back with another idea now, and we're going, as the chairman said, in the other direction. Mr. Chairman, you've mentioned that the shale revolution is starting to be accepted even by President Obama now, who, to his credit, is embracing the fact that we have really an abundance of energy in this country. I think the full extent of how abundant and what kind of new situation is still not very well understood. The astonishing fact is that the United States has now become the low-cost energy producer on a global basis. It is not limited to natural gas, it actually goes to oil as well. And we find ourselves in a very strange set of circumstances where we are, as you mentioned, the Saudi Arabia of the natural gas business, but I would also venture to say that we are energy abundant in a lot of different ways. But we do this without an energy policy. And we do this with a set of regulatory frameworks that are still based on the fact that we need to import a tremendous amount of energy for this country. So the regulatory framework and the reality on the ground, as new as it is, are totally disconnected. What has happened in the last 2 years is that the effect of being energy abundant is starting to get noticed. We are now an NGL exporter for the first time. We are exporting propane and butane when 2 years ago we were importing propane and butane. Last summer we also became a net oil product exporter for the first time in many decades. We are exporting 50% more coal in 2011 than we did in 2010, simply because natural gas has become so abundant and cheap here, it's creating an opportunity to export coal. So on a fundamental basis, we're becoming an energy exporter increasingly, and in another few years, we will be a net exporter of natural gas as well, as long as the regulatory framework follows. The full impact of what this means is not completely understood or grasped yet. I hear much about how the fact that we're a low-cost energy producer is bringing industries back to the US, mostly petrochemicals initially, also car manufacturers. This is a derivative product. The first and primary product is much more direct than this. We are drilling with 15% more rigs than we were last year. And this is a phenomenon that goes on. What it means is that we're using 15% more people to drill wells. There is no other industry in the country that is growing and employing people in that kind of growth mode. Nothing else that I know in this country. Furthermore, we are manufacturing more rigs because we need horizontal rigs. So the manufacturing industry benefits directly from the fact that we need those rigs. In every community where we are actually drilling more wells, we are supporting the housing industry, the lodging industry, the food industry, the service industry, the trucking industry, and so on and on. So the impact of the fact that we've increased the number of rigs in this country for 3 or 4 years in a row now is a direct driver of the unemployment reduction in this country. The 8.3% unemployment is directly related to the number of wells and to the health of the energy industry. So I would say that we are very fortunate that we have a leading indicator. And my recommendation to policymakers would always be watch the rig count. If the rig count is increasing, the country is doing pretty well. If the rig count starts decreasing, we have a problem. See what you can do about it. Here in Texas, it's even more true. In South Texas and the Eagle Ford, we are using 60% more rigs than we did last year. So our economy here is at full employment. We're having a hard time finding people, getting hamburgers in restaurants, finding hotel rooms for visitors, and developing the infrastructure. We infrastructure constrain here in order to continue to perpetuate the growth. To the north in the Permian Basin, the number of rigs has increased last year by 20%. This is a phenomenal opportunity, and it's true in other areas of the country as well, such as North Dakota, most of Oklahoma, northern Pennsylvania, soon to be Ohio, eastern Colorado. This is a phenomenon that is on a national basis today. There are 30 to 32 states now that can be energy producers, and the critical thing is to be able to develop a demand response for the abundance of riches that we have. The regulatory framework is hopelessly behind. We have directly to involve a number of agencies, the most prominent of which are the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the Department of Energy, the EPA, and the Department of Transportation. They all have their own rules. They don't cooperate with each other very well. It takes 60 days to drill a well. It takes 18 months to obtain a permit before you start construction to move the product to market. If our upstream industry is going at 15% per year, the infrastructure that this country needs is going to fall hopelessly behind. And I would argue has already done so. In addition to coordinating these agencies, we also have to be consistent with other agencies. For example, state, commerce, the US Trade Representative, because we cannot have policies in this country that are inconsistent on a global basis. For example, we have just maintained that other countries do not have the right to restrict the export of their commodities. And this is following an action that was generated by the United States in conjunction with the European Union and Mexico, and filed with the World Trade Organization, where we were successful. It is very difficult in that context to have a different agency maintain that we're going to restrict the export of our own commodities. And therefore, not only do we have to coordinate some of the agencies, we also have to make sure that the policies that are declared by these agencies are consistent with the statute of what the policies of this country and this administration are. We have been in a position at Cheniere Energy to try to promote the ability to export natural gas from the United States to the rest of the world, because it is our position that the demand for natural gas cannot keep up in the United States with the abundance of production that we have. And in fact, with the gas that is already stranded in the country, that cannot go anywhere. We have been successful with the first project at Sabine Pass to sell gas to companies in the United Kingdom, in Spain, in Korea, and in India. The implication of the fact that we can become an energy exporter on a global basis has profound implication for the geopolitical position of the United States on a global scene. It will have impact on gas producers around the world, including Russia, and gas consumers around the world, including China. And these benefits can only be derived if we have a clear energy policy that lets the market do what the market will do. We are trying to do the same thing here in Corpus Christi. We have a site that we have owned for 6 years. Mr. Chairman, as you mentioned, initially we viewed it as a potential energy importing facility, but it really does work in both directions. And we would like to develop it as an export facility to take advantage of the riches that the Eagle Ford is generating for this area in general. I will say that when we produce natural gas, we produce condensates, we produce ethane, propane, butane along with it, and the market for those products is saturated. Condensates will always be attractive. All the other C's are not. The propane, butane, ethane, and methane have no outlet, so we need to find something to do with that gas in order to continue with the prosperity that could be generated with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Weiss. Now,
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, good morning. My name is Jeff Weiss. I'm Executive Vice President of Orion Drilling Company, a Corpus Christi-based land rig drilling contractor currently operating 13 drilling rigs in South Texas. Thanks to you, Chairman Issa, and committee for traveling to Corpus Christi to explore our recent job growth, a direct result of growth in the energy sector. Understanding the positive impact the energy sector has on South Texas employment should serve to strengthen the resolve of federal and state policymakers to focus on a consistent and comprehensive policy to promote energy development across the United States. I would also like to thank the Corpus Christi Regional Economic Development Corporation for including Orion Drilling in this process, and Texas A&M Corpus Christi for hosting this important hearing. I began my oil and gas career in 1978 with Halliburton's IMCO services. At IMCO, I was trained in fluids management. I continued in fluids management in various capacities, including divisional technical advisor and district manager until 1995, when I joined Pioneer Drilling, a 4-rig drilling company based in Corpus Christi. At the time, Pioneer was truly that, a pioneer in adopting new technologies to improve the efficiency and quality of drilling. After leaving Pioneer in 2003, I joined Wayne Squires to create Orion Drilling. Initially, we were a single-rig drilling company with 23 employees. As our reputation as best-in-class contractor with state-of-the-art equipment continued to spread, we were able to parlay a single rig into a company that operates 13 rigs in South Texas and is opening a new division with 3 new build rigs in Du Bois, Pennsylvania in 2012. Our focus on providing quality equipment with the latest technology makes Orion unique. A hallmark of Orion's unique approach to drilling business is our focus on the softening impact of economic cycles and their impact on oil and gas drilling activity. From those 23 employees in 2003, Orion has grown to a staff of over 550, with further growth planned in 2012 as we continue to build new drilling rigs and begin our operation in Pennsylvania. Our employees span from skilled rig crews to a host of petroleum, mechanical, and process engineers. Our commitment to growing a quality team is also apparent in the fact that Orion Drilling is one of only 2 drilling contractors that hold the full array of American Petroleum Institute certifications. We are proud of both the symbolic and practical meaning of these qualifications, as they provide us with the opportunity to guarantee quality and safety to our customers and attract the best and brightest rig employees, engineers, and construction professionals to our team. Not only do we recognize the positive impact of good industry fundamentals on our business, we also recognize the importance of positive public policy to maintain energy sector growth. With oil and gas as one of the primary drivers of Texas economy, our state and local governments have provided a positive policy framework in which to operate. However, the need for a consistent, clear, and comprehensive energy policy on the federal level is paramount if our industry is to continue its quest to make the United States more energy independent, responsibly develop our natural resources, and continue to provide the fuel that drives the American economy. Conversely, a lack of a consistent energy policy and the confusion surrounding current federal policies, mandates, and regulations will result in growing uncertainty that very well could put our recent growth in natural resource development and employment at risk. The energy industry is comprised of thousands of companies just like Orion. Businesses are looking to provide fuel for our economy, jobs for our communities, and be responsible corporate citizens and stewards of our lands and environment. The best way to ensure that continues is for the federal government to articulate a clear and consistent energy policy that provides assurances our industry can meet the energy needs of our country for decades to come. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the invitation to appear today, and I'll be glad to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. And I'll begin with just a quick questions, and I'll go in reverse order since you've got the most current thing in my little bitty brain here. You're drilling a lot of wells. Oil?
Mainly oil.
With natural gas?
Mainly oil. Natural gas is a byproduct of most of the
What are
wells.
you doing with the natural gas out of most of those wells? Is it being flared?
Some of it's being flared because the pipelines are not in place.
Is that a permit process, or is that infrastructure, or is it a combination? How long will we burn one of the most precious forms of energy typically from the time that you are able to begin harvesting till the time you're able to actually harvest the natural gas? Because that's one of the areas that concerns me in both state and federal regulation, is how efficient are we in at least being part of the solution on that?
Well, I think that a lot of the wells that you see flaring in South Texas have a low amount of natural gas with the liquids. The liquids are being stripped out. And so we have to look at the economics.
The efficiency of how much there really is.
Yes. And, there are some areas where pipelines aren't in place.
But in a perfect world, we'd harvest every bit of that natural gas, wouldn't we?
I agree with that.
By the way, what caused you to pick the home of Du Bois Brewing Company for your new headquarters? I've been to Du Bois, and except for Du Bois Brewing Company, it's pretty much just a place on the Interstate 80, isn't it?
And that's one of the main reasons it's on 80, which we feel is going to give us access to Ohio.
So it's right in the center of a region in which both your west and east, there's huge resources, primarily natural gas.
And we feel a huge opportunity for not only us, but for the country.
So as a Texan, you're willing to invest in Ohio and Pennsylvania?
Yes, and the reason is...
I want to thank you as a native Ohioan.
Well, what we feel is that that is the largest gas field in the world. And, the country's going to need natural gas. And the Utica looks like it's going to have liquids. If you look at years past, the northern part of Pennsylvania and Ohio have produced a lot of oil. And there are some refineries up there. So, and there are pipelines up there too. So
They used to bring natural gas north.
Right. Yeah, we're looking to expand in what we consider the best basins, and West Texas, of course, South Texas, and we like the Marcellus.
Have Ohio and Pennsylvania begun to embrace what you're trying to accomplish for them as much as Texas?
Well,
or is that too high a hurdle?
No, I think what's happening is that 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, when we produced coal, I'm from Pennsylvania, we produced coal in Pennsylvania, and we didn't do a good job of...
I was strip mining with puddles of water left.
We do a nice job now, but back then we didn't. And I think people remember that, and they're afraid of what oil and gas will do. And like Ms. Jones said, there are a lot of inaccuracies, especially in that part of the country. New York has banned fracking. I think New Jersey is getting ready to ban fracking. But it's interesting, where will they get their energy?
But we'll get to whether or not you sell them what they won't produce domestically. I will note that I did a little research for this project, and Pennsylvania land that was selling for $7,000 an acre, agricultural land, some of it with coal underneath. The typical rate for a license right now is 6,000 acres just for the mineral rights. Basically because of the potential for natural gas. So it is interesting that you can basically buy land 5 years ago and sell just the mineral rights for pretty much what you paid for it. That's that big a difference. Mr. Suki, you mentioned something that as a free trader, you mentioned that the WTO had found, the World Trade Organization found that in fact it was a violation of the law when I guess China wanted to withhold bauxite. Is that right?
That is correct.
And I just want to make sort of a record clear. America has been the largest exporter of food for a long time. We didn't question, as we fed the world, whether or not we should hoard food, did we?
That is also correct.
And isn't it true that no member of the oil cartels, basically OPEC, can even be a WTO member because running a cartel is inconsistent with the WTO?
That is my understanding.
So essentially, if we want to be a free trade civilized nation, we by definition have to not act the way OPEC has acted toward us in the world market.
Well, you've mentioned the case of our intervention with the World Trade Organization against China for bauxite. And I think China would just have to change 2 words, China to the USA and bauxite to natural gas, if we try to restrict the trade. And the lawsuit would be valid in both directions.
It is sort of amazing to me that we were all prepared to import huge amounts of natural gas from Qatar and continue importing oil from around the world. And now that we have a chance to have an abundance, we're not willing to exchange that. So I'm just got a couple more quick questions. One last one, because it hit me, is you mentioned the excess in propane, and I'd like to make the record clear. Isn't propane pretty much the easiest fuel to put into an automobile? Isn't it the easiest conversion? You pretty much just put a tank in the trunk and plumb it?
I wouldn't know about that.
Okay. But so you haven't looked at the potential for diverting the propane. Well, perhaps our first witness can do that.
No, but I'll make a note, and maybe there's another business model to develop here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I happen to grow up in Cleveland, Ohio, which is halfway between Du Bois and nowhere, I guess. But and it was interesting because delivery trucks ran on propane, liquefied.
Yes.
The liquefied gases have a tendency to be the easiest ones to convert. That's why we all have those gas ranges. They're just easy to do. Well, Ms. Jones, you had some very interesting testimony, and I think the area that I'm most concerned about, and I'll ask you the tough questions. You can answer the propane one if you'd like, but you also have responsibility for licensing and safety in your state waters, your territorial waters. And our committee did extensive hearings and research into the post-BP spill. Would you like to tell us how you take that, how you approach drilling safety in the water, and any comment you want to make in the intervening period between BP and today, and how you've adjusted to it would be appreciated.
Thank you, Chairman Issa, because
you covered everything else
question.
in your opening testimony.
Yeah, I did. Well, and I squeezed it. There's so much more. Quickly, I just would like to say that as far as flaring natural gas, they have to get a permit from the Railroad Commission because it is a precious commodity, and they can roll it over if they need to. But any flaring that's going on has been approved by the Commission, and we do have a lot of permits to flare because the shortage of the infrastructure to get the natural gas to market. A little bit on the economics of the Eagle Ford is that the drillers and the operators, the companies will go and find the oil-rich regions, the oily parts of it, of course, because of the economics and the price right now, and they're trending away from the natural gas areas of the Eagle Ford, but there were still contracts they had for their leases, and some of them have to go ahead and drill, and so this is where government can come in and at least avoid hurting the equilibrium that is going on by putting more and more regulations in front of a company that is trying to make the market work with the property owner, the natural gas lease owner, mineral owner. So flaring approved by the Railroad Commission, and we watch that very closely. We're very concerned about the infrastructure and the lack of, and we also permit the pipelines that are laid in the Eagle Ford shale. And propane is a great fuel, and Texas is very rich in propane, and in fact the Railroad Commission lets grants to change over school buses to propane-powered school buses and vehicles. And so you were right on when you mentioned propane, but natural gas also has a tremendous role to play in the fueling of fleet vehicles. So to the extent that the market will go ahead and is ready for a transformation to natural gas fueled vehicles, we're just on the cusp of doing that. We had the first president of the Republic of Texas, Sam Houston, who was so smart and had many other traits that were very colorful.
He understood where to pick a battle, too.
The what? Yes.
He-
I mean, but he was a colorful character, and when we went into the Union, we joined America through treaty. And so we, the Republic of Texas, soon to be the state of Texas, got to keep the jurisdiction of our waters off to 3 leagues offshore. We're the only state in the United States to maintain that jurisdiction, but for the western boundary of Florida. And so we are unique in that all of the natural resources below the ground out to 3 leagues, which is about 10 miles, belong to Texans, the people here in this room and across the state who couldn't be here today, but I know they would have liked to have if they could. It would have taken them 12 hours to drive from
It is tough that
Amarillo.
you can get to Chicago faster than you get
Exactly.
Corpus Christi in some
Absolutely.
cases.
But nevertheless, we all benefit from the natural resources. And we have had, I thought it was interesting when I was testifying after the Macondo BP blowout, a lot of legislation came down before the Congress had its own transformation, if you will, to leadership who understood how important oil and natural gas operations were to the country.
And thank you for sending us Blake.
That's right, exactly. But we were concerned because there was an attempt to take over our jurisdiction off to 3 leagues and put it under federal purview. And I spoke out against it and wrote against it, but it was lurking there that, in fact, the federal government, under whose watch the BP blowout occurred, would know better than the Railroad Commission, under whose watch no BP blowout has ever occurred in our state waters. And so thank you for you and your colleagues for putting the brakes on that, some of that legislation that was designed to take over our jurisdiction offshore. But since then, I have, in the last year and a half, I made sure that we worked collaboratively with another state agency, Texas Parks and Wildlife, and we have done a very in-depth inspection of every well off the coast of the state of Texas in our state waters to make sure that, yes, we were on the right track in our permitting and our regulatory, and there are no liabilities or risks out there for this great bay that you see out the window. We are on top of oversight of our drilling in our state waters to the extent that the federal government should be and ought to be taking our template, the Texas plan, and applying it to federal waters where the royalties are owned by all of Americans as well. So I hope that we can provide a standard the federal government can aspire to be like.
And now for a man who shares your view on that, Mr. Farragut.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Jones, I'd like to visit with you a little bit. You're hearing, and we are all hearing a lot from the EPA about the alleged dangers of hydraulic fracking. How long has fracking been going on in Texas?
We have been fracking 60 years at least, Congressman.
That's 60.
Yes.
60 years.
60. The myth is that this is some new technology. And in fact, it's not new at all. It's improved, and the footprint is smaller, and that's what happens when Americans put their minds to technology and applying it in the workplace. We build a better mousetrap every day, and it's gotten better, but in spite of the early days of 60 years ago, we have zero instances of groundwater contamination.
And so what is done to protect the groundwater? I understand that generally the fracking takes place between 1 and 2 miles
That's
below any of the groundwater, but obviously to get down there you may have to pass through groundwater. So what's done to protect the groundwater and the surface water?
That's right, and the Railroad Commission has very strict rules and regulations regarding cementing and the engineering of the wellbore in and of itself, and double casing through aquifers until such time as the aquifer level is it's identified, and casing is it's double cased and cemented through any kind of potential aquifers to ensure that there is no breakout or migration or contamination of aquifers, groundwater aquifers. So, we set a very high standard, and industry adheres to that standard because nobody deliberately, of course I'm assuming that they are going to make me proud all the time, but nevertheless, we have rules in place and enforcement actions that we use to ensure that our rules and regulations are followed.
Do you think there's a need for national regulation by the EPA, or is this something you think the states could do on their own? And why do you think the EPA is so interested in regulating it?
Fortunately, I can't even begin to imagine the mindset of the EPA. I can imagine that the need for more jobs, bureaucratic jobs, maybe something like that is driving their initiative. But I will say I absolutely am opposed to any kind of national regulatory scheme. And there's a practical reason for that, along with my philosophical leanings. The practical reason is that the geology underground is not the same in any of the states. In fact, just a state boundary is above ground, as you know, but the geology is ever changing underneath the ground. And we have different tax laws. We have severance taxes other states don't have. We have different sales tax plans. So the economics of each individual well are different in every state as well. So when you're combining that with the geology, the topography of the roads in the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania and Ohio, they will have different issues related to the disposal of water, produced water, than we have in Texas. So they'll have smaller roads and maybe more hills and winding roads that we might not have in Texas, but we'll have different issues. It's impossible, even if they wanted to have a national plan, it would be practically impossible to try and attempt to have a one-size-fits-all parameter of regulatory oversight for all of these varieties and variations in topography and geology and tax plans in the various states. So I am opposed, practically speaking and philosophically as well, that the states need to maintain their sovereignty and maintain their control over their own natural resources.
Well, thank you. In addition to the EPA attempting to regulate fracking, which would have I believe, a negative effect on oil and gas production in Texas and the country, are there other federal agencies that are making it difficult or pose a threat to the oil and gas industry or the energy production industry in Texas? I know I hear a lot from my friends in West Texas about fish and wildlife being involved.
The Endangered Species Act has morphed into endangering the Human Species Act. We are seeing now, what you've been hearing are the stories about the listing of the lizards. Endangered Species Act, the ESA, is an example of a process that is lacking sound science and peer review. Possible listing of 2 lizards in Texas that are going to put roadblocks in front of and drive costs up of the drilling and production of oil and natural gas in the Permian Basin, historically the largest oil producing basin in the United States of America, is faced with, the dune sagebrush lizard, and then down here in the Eagle Ford, a potential listing in the future is the spotted-tailed earless lizard, and that's in the Eagle Ford Shale. Now, interestingly, the ESA itself has maintained that fire ants are one of the cause of the diminishing population of these lizards, although no studies have really been done to establish what that population is. But if it has been diminished, it could be by fire ants. And so we have fire ants that attack lizards potentially, diminished population, which gives the ESA, the Endangered Species Act, the justification to put the brakes on oil and gas and ranching operations, which are very important in Texas. These operations have been going on for decades in the Permian Basin. It's a very mature and experienced oil field, if you will, and trucks and traffic and drilling rigs and ranching have been going on for years. And all of a sudden, this new diminishing of potential population of lizards that have been listed is something that they have a concern about.
Well,
So you're right on in our concerns.
And let me just get to a couple of our other witnesses just for a couple of seconds. Mr. Weiss, your company's growing, and you've been hiring quite a few employees. Are you having trouble finding skilled employees? Are you having trouble finding work? Or are there plenty of people there to take the jobs?
Well, we're a smaller company, and we offer newer rigs, and I think we are the highest paying drilling contractor, or one of the highest paying, but we still struggle with that. 3 years ago, we used to require 2 years experience. Now we require 1 year experience, and we're beginning to start training programs where we can take somebody that we like and actually bring him within our fold and make an oil field worker out of that.
So what does an oil field worker typically make? What's the salary?
The lowest guy on the rig makes approximately $65,000 a year. The driller, which is I want to make this known, is a highly skilled position. They can make as much as $120,000 a year. And in Texas, we normally work a rotation of 7 on, 7 off. And so you actually live out there 7 days in a row. You work 12 hours a day for 7 days. It's hot down here. It's a tough job, but you can see it's very well compensated.
All right. And Mr. Suki, you originally, I guess it was, 7 or 8 years ago, y'all were talking about building a plant to import liquefied natural gas. Now you're talking about exporting natural gas. Can you talk a little bit about the economics of that and what gas is worth here in Texas as opposed to what it's worth in other parts of the world?
Well,
You don't actually have to tell us what you're selling it for. That's okay.
Just ballpark figures, yeah. I mean, obviously there's got to be some, for a project the size you're proposing, there's got to be a big price differential that.
Yeah, the fundamental premise is that the gas that we want is worth nothing in Texas because it's associated gas and it's going to be flared unless there's a market found for it. So today gas prices in the US are $2.50. This is a Henry Hub price. It's probably not much different down here, but as the Eagle Ford continues to develop and as the Permian continues to develop, we're looking at, in the last 12 months, one BCF of gas that didn't exist last year. And if you start looking at the rigs that have actually drilled wells and cannot find a market for them, cannot find an infrastructure to move the gas to market, and it cannot find a market to which to sell the gas. We're in a situation now that the incremental gas that we're finding is worthless. And it's only being produced because the condensates are very valuable. And you can move the condensates by truck. You can get a truck to get to your well, pick the condensates, and move them to market. And on that basis alone, they will pay Mr. Weiss in less than a year. And the rest, they need to find a market for. In the rest of the world today, in Asia, you are really substituting for oil products. There is 100 BCF market on a global basis where you're using oil and oil products for power generation, fertilizer production, and chemical production, where you really should use natural gas if it was priced on the basis of what does it cost to produce this in Texas and deliver it to that market. And it starts as closely to Puerto Rico, where they're using diesel and fuel to generate their electricity at a cost of $17 to $18 in MMBTU, where we could deliver gas to them. And for this, we don't need a permit because it is still in the United States. But we can deliver gas to them at $8 or $9 and save Puerto Rico $1 billion to $1.5 billion a year, and have some very significant environmental advantages to when you burn natural gas as opposed to burning fuel. And this applies everywhere, from Puerto Rico all the way to China, with a number of countries in between.
And do you think that our proximity in South Texas, or where some of the other shale gas fields are, is going to be an economic boon to them because these manufacturing facilities or other facilities that use gas will locate there?
Here in Texas, yes, I think it will, but we already have an industrial infrastructure here that has already started the revival. But when you're looking at the time frame that is needed to build new infrastructure, it takes many years. So you can have a big announcement of a petrochemical plant that Dow Chemical or Shell announces. That's great. It'll take 2 years to permit and 5 or 6 years to build. So it's a solution for 2018-19, not for tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you very much.
The low-hanging fruit has already been picked up.
Thank you.
Well, recognizing that we could go on with the first panel forever, but there is a second panel, if you don't mind, I'd like to give a little homework out. And we call it, making statements for the record or supplying additional information. I'd like a couple of items. First of all, for any member of the panel, but particularly for Commissioner, every possible way that you and the Commission look and say groundwater contamination can occur. Our committee held hearings many years ago on the fact that we were having huge groundwater contamination from single-sided holding tanks at gas stations that basically, if they leaked, and there was no safeguard. So we all understand that leaks can happen, and if you're not fracking, but you still have something coming up through the ground, a leak can happen. So anything that is in your checklist that you could fairly easily pull off and provide the committee would be helpful. Sort of, how do you view this? Because obviously, well, we know that there have been no fracking-related leaks. We all understand that groundwater does get contaminated by a number of ways, including, the person who simply is indiscriminate with their oil when they change their oil. The geopolitical stuff, and Sharif, this is probably more for you, but it's for all of you. Our committee is anticipating holding a more in-depth hearing in Washington on the impact of being a net exporter versus a net importer. This would include many of your customers, and we're not asking you to talk about customers, potential customers, but sort of the impact of Russia being able to turn on and off a spigot in other countries versus the United States. Anything that you would be able to give us on your view of global market suppliers, who they are versus the United States as one, because that would be feedstock for an additional hearing. Last but not least, Luis Fortuño, the governor of Puerto Rico, is a dear friend of mine. We served in Congress together. And when I went down to Puerto Rico, all he talked about was cutting in half the carbon footprint, making it cleaner, and saving money at the same time. So there's nobody that's more interested in going from oil to gas than Governor Fortuño. So although I didn't know all the details of your role in it, from my former colleague in Puerto Rico, that he hopes that to be one of his legacy as governor. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your testimony. We will keep the record open for other extraneous remarks, but and you don't have to do the homework, but anything you can give us along those lines or other lines would be appreciated for this and future hearings. And with that, we'll take a short recess.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.